It started quietly, the kind of quiet that hums before something breaks. In the fall of 1973, America was still glowing with post-war confidence. Chrome cars, cheap gas, and highways that never seemed to end. Then, overnight, the pumps ran dry, lines wrapped around corners, engines idled in prayer, and tempers burned hotter than the fuel we couldn't find. For the first time in modern history, the most powerful nation on earth stood still, not because of war or protest, but because the tank was empty. This wasn't just an energy crisis, it was an identity crisis. And every driver in America was about to learn what it means to run on empty. To understand why, we need to go back to an October morning when radio said a single word: war. The Yom Kippur War erupted, and the United States backed Israel with supplies. Oil producers in the Arab world watched closely, then reached for the one lever they knew we couldn't ignore. They tightened the tap. OPEC announced an embargo aimed at the U.S. and others. Prices didn't just rise, they jumped. The 1973 oil crisis wasn't a theory anymore. It was the meter clicking faster than our paychecks. From my living room, I remember the TV light on my father's face. He didn't raise his voice. He just did math in his head. Miles to work, gallons in the tank, dollars in the bank. He didn't say the word OPEC, but he felt it like a hand on the wheel, turning our daily lives without asking. Here's the part that confused people then and still does. Oil was still moving. Tankers were out there, slow tracking across oceans. But the rules changed overnight. Quotas tightened. Shipping lanes and schedules became a chessboard. A rumor of shortage can behave like a shortage. People topped off tanks they'd never bothered to fill before. Stations got deliveries, then ran dry before lunchtime. I saw out of gas signs written in marker like a kid's note, except it was the new law of the land. Meanwhile, policymakers in Washington scrambled. The 70s energy crisis landed like a brick on the resolute desk. Memos crossed in flight. One office said, "Conserve," another said, "Don't panic," and a third said both. The president went on television and told us we'd have to save energy. He talked about independence, about breaking free from foreign oil. It sounded bold enough. It also sounded late. And there was the price. Exporters raised it sharply. If you were a refinery manager, it meant recalculating everything. If you were a driver, it meant a number on a sign that made your stomach drop. The price moves didn't just drain wallets. They set off a chain reaction that reached into grocery aisles, factory floors, and kitchen tables across vintage America. That's how an oil shortage in 1973 becomes a 100% recession you can feel when you open the pantry. At street level, the symptoms arrived before the diagnosis. I remember a Friday afternoon when a station near us got a load. The line formed as if by instinct. You could hear the soft cluck of turn signals and the low murmur of transistor radios. People asked each other, "You hear anything about Monday?" Information moved car to car, more trusted than the evening news. The stories of nostalgia. We tell now were just survival then. What nobody knew at the time was how much of the crisis lived in timing. Tankers delayed a week. Deliveries shifted a day. A city could go from plenty to nothing between breakfast and dinner. Some regions fared better, others worse. We didn't have a national dashboard. We had rumors and the expression on the station owner's face. That was our data. Inside the White House, a new language formed: allocation, quotas, conservation. Outside, our language got shorter. Full, empty maybe. The OPEC oil embargo had turned geopolitics into a line at the corner pump. I remember thinking how strange it was that a war across the ocean could stall a bus in our town. But that's the 1973 American history lesson you don't forget. Supply lines are stories with characters you'll never meet who still decide when you get to go home. Meanwhile, there were real bottlenecks and imaginary ones. A driver topping off every other day becomes 1,000 drivers doing the same. A tanker waiting on paperwork turns into a city wondering if it's next. Panic buying didn't cause the embargo, but it made the lines longer and the tempers shorter. This was the moment everything changed. The car stopped being a promise and became a question. Could you get to work? Could you visit your mother? The freedom the highway once offered had conditions now, printed in block letters. ODD even. We were learning a new rhythm, one line at a time. While leaders traded statements, my town learned to wait. That was the hardest part, not the price, not the speeches, the waiting, the engine idling, the feeling that somebody far away had their hand on your key. The first sign was a scrap of cardboard on a pump handle. Out of gas. No logo, no polish, just a magic marker surrender. Cones appeared at station entrances like little orange sentries, and hand-lettered notes promised next delivery, maybe 3 p.m. The corner station that once felt like a friendly porch now looked like a ration window. You learned to read the handwriting. Fat marker meant panic. Neat cursive meant hope. Odd, even days started as talk, then turned into a rule printed in the paper. My license plate decided when I could try to buy. A neighbor who'd waved for years suddenly felt like a gatekeeper, eyes on stickers and dates, apologizing as he turned people away. Arguments bloomed, then fizzled into muttered sorries. You'd hear, "I'm just doing what they told me," and you believed him, because that's what most of us were doing. Trips were rethought. The annual Saturday drive to see fall leaves became a porch coffee and a backyard rake. High school football buses combined runs and crawled in second gear to save fuel. Church carpools sprouted. Someone mapped neighborhoods by pew. We cut corners off our lives, one errand at a time. My mother pressed a fingertip to the calendar and moved everything 2 squares to the right. The dawn lines were their own country. We brought thermoses, folded blankets, and the low companionship of transistor radios. You'd roll the window down just enough to share the weather and the rumor. Engines clicked off, then on, then off again, as people saved drops like coins. We pushed cars in neutral to inch forward, shoulders against chrome, breath turning to fog. There was a rhythm to it. Push, coast, brake. That felt like a hymn written for the moment. Kindness and theft lived side by side. I watched a man fill a stranger's spare can because she had kids in the back seat and he remembered having been that tired once. I also woke to find a fuel cap open and the smell of gasoline in the air, like somebody had siphoned a quart of my week right out from under me. One night, a Chevy stalled uphill in the line, and a dozen of us heaved until our legs shook. When we got it to the crest, the driver cried, not out of relief, out of embarrassment. We told him we were just glad to move. Meanwhile, life downstream hiccuped. Milk deliveries missed their usual rhythm. Stores opened late or not at all. Bread shelves looked like winter had come early. A hardware store posted no returns on gas cans, which told you everything about the mood. Tempers shortened. I watched a man snap at a clerk over a dime and apologize before the sentence finished. You could feel the weight of the meter in everyone's tone. At home, we organized like a platoon. Lists got tighter. We stacked chores by route and prayed for green lights. Somebody invented a system with paper clips on a map. Each clip a gallon, each errand a cost. My father checked tire pressure like it could save the month. It helped. So did coasting down hills and counting seconds at stop signs. We found fuel in the margins. And somehow, between the squeeze and the waiting, a community formed in line. People swapped tips on stations that took cash only, on pumps that ran a little slow, on the manager who held back 5 gallons for nurses. You learned the names of dogs riding shotgun, the songs other people trusted to pass the time, the way folks coughed when they were trying not to complain. It felt like the whole country pressed nose to tail, moving by inches in conversation. The rules changed weekly. Some towns closed stations on Sundays to conserve, others set curfews and locked nozzles at dusk. A handwritten sign at our place read, 20 gallons max, don't make me the bad guy. He wasn't. He slept on a cot behind the counter because if the tanker came at 2 a.m., he needed to be there. You could see the toll in the red of his eyes and the way he counted aloud. I kept a notebook in the glove box. Dates, gallons, miles. It felt like a diary of a smaller life, and yet there was pride in it. We were learning the math of living carefully. The phrase, gas lines 100,000 sounds like a headline now, but then it was an alarm clock, a thermos, a half tank, and a promise to make it last. By afternoon, heat and frustration simmered off hoods. By night, engines hummed like distant generators outside bedroom windows. You slept to that sound. You woke to it. Waiting wasn't empty. It was a new kind of work, paid in patience. And patience, I learned, was a currency. We spent it at dawn, earned it by sharing, lost it when a rumor turned to nothing. We adjusted our days. But the rules kept moving, and before long, the government stepped into the line with us. The first time I heard 55, it wasn't a song lyric, it was a rule. The radio said the national speed limit was now 55 miles per hour. They said it would save fuel. Out on the interstate, you could feel the grumble. Truckers tapping brakes, family wagons settling into a slower hum. The right foot learned restraint. The left lane lost its swagger. Signs went up, and with them a new etiquette. We coast now, we count now, we wait. Thermostats came next. Washington asked us to turn them down. In our house, the living room slipped from cozy to put on a sweater. Malls dimmed a notch. Office lights clicked off room by room at 5. Holiday displays toned down. The blow-mold Santas still waved, but a little less brightly. You learned to hear the sound of waste, like a faucet you'd forgotten to close. Odd, even wasn't just folklore anymore. It got formal. Newspapers printed calendars with shaded squares for who could buy when. States layered on curfews. No sales after dusk. Sundays shuttered entirely in some places. A hand-painted sign at our station announced, "Closed Sundays, save gas, save nerves." We planned around it. Saturday night felt like battening down for a storm, except the storm was Monday morning's commute. The president appeared on television again, the room washing blue. He talked about the 1973 oil crisis, about sacrifice, about independence from the OPEC oil embargo, and the 70s energy crisis shaping policy. He introduced an energy czar, a phrase that sounded both powerful and improvised. We were told to conserve, to share rides, to rethink unnecessary trips. It wasn't scolding. It was a plea dressed as a plan. Price controls slid in like a brace to keep the market from wobbling itself apart. Allocation programs tried to funnel fuel to where it mattered, hospitals, farms, emergency crews, while keeping the rest of us on a thin but steady drip. Winners and losers appeared overnight. A station by the interstate thrived on truck traffic. A neighborhood pump went hungry. Whispers followed. Someone was flipping fuel out the back. Someone else had a cousin with a tanker route who could make things happen. I never saw the black market, but I saw the suspicion it bred. People counted the gallons of the guy ahead of them. Fairness became arithmetic. At home, I put Scotch tape on the wall by the porch light switch and wrote, "Turn it off." It felt half surrender, half solidarity. Every click saved a sliver. We swapped incandescent bulbs where we could. We slid towels along the base of drafty doors. We learned where heat sneaks away, then taught it manners. On the highway, 55 mph did more than slow us. It changed time. Trips stretched, the mind wandered. We learned to tuck in behind 18-wheelers, to ride the slipstream, to treat momentum like money. The needle on the gas gauge fell slower, and that tiny mercy mattered. I could feel patience growing in my knuckles. Carpools got formal too. The ride wanted corkboard at work, filled with index cards, cross streets, shifts, the universal promise of gas money. A guy from shipping and a woman from accounts payable learned they lived 2 blocks apart. I heard their laughter in the hallway. Saving fuel made co-workers into neighbors. Lanes on certain roads sprouted diamonds, carpool only, and those who qualified wore it like a little honor. Meanwhile, enforcement lived in small moments. A cruiser idled under an overpass, the trooper's hat tipped low. You checked your speed without thinking. A station owner, cheeks gaunt from too many midnight deliveries, stuck to the 10-gallon max, even when a regular begged. He hated it. He did it anyway. We were all referees for a game nobody wanted to play. Government PSAs taught new habits with a calm cadence. Combine trips, keep tires inflated, tune your engine. 55 saves lives and gas. It sounds quaint now, but back then those were survival instructions. I remember crouching by the compressor at the corner station, the hose hissing like a snake, my father's thumb pressed to the gauge's face. 2 pounds makes a difference, he said, and it did. Over weeks, over miles, over a whole country, those tiny decisions added up to something you could feel. There were missteps, a shipment misallocated, a factory starved of diesel, a mayor holding a press conference to explain why buses were late again. We were drawing a map while we were already on the road. Each correction took a week to show, and by then the rumor mill had baked in a different answer. You learned to trust what worked in your zip code and let the rest be noise. Church bulletins added fuel notes next to potluck sign-ups. Little League delayed practices until the even families could drive. The PTA stopped selling door to door and set up a table at the station, meeting parents where they already were. Conservation wasn't a separate chore. It braided into everything. The phrase, 73 American history feels big, but most of it happened in kitchens and parking lots. In the seconds you let a car roll instead of tap the gas. We didn't call it policy legacy then. We called it making do. But the bones of a new way of living were being set. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve was being sketched. Fuel economy talk got serious, not just in Detroit boardrooms, but in diner booths where people argued over miles per gallon like box scores. Appliance stickers showed up, those yellow tags that turned electricity into numbers you could compare. Vintage America was learning modern thrift, 1 watt, 1 mile at a time. The thing is, all those rules felt smaller than the lines, but they worked on the lines from the edges. They taught us how to live with less without living angry. My taped note by the light switch curled at the edges by spring, but I left it. A reminder, a little flag for a quiet kind of patriotism. We're in this together, so lift your foot, share your seat, and turn it off when you can. Scarcity has a way of sharpening pencils in boardrooms. Detroit felt the squeeze first in pride, then in plans. Those big V8s, beautiful, loud, thirsty, suddenly looked like bad manners. Engineers detuned them, choked carburetors, stretched gearing. Brochures swapped horsepower brags for miles per gallon whispers. On showroom floors, the salesmen's smiles tightened. Out in the diner booths, a new skepticism percolated with the coffee. A six-cylinder in a full size? You could hear the wound in that question. But meanwhile, something else was happening in parking lots outside grocery stores. Little cars kept showing up, and they kept leaving with happy drivers. Hondas, Datsuns, Toyotas, boxy and simple, with engines that sipped instead of gulped. My buddy at work let me drive his new Civic around the block. It felt different, light on its feet, honest about what it could do. The heater worked fast. The needle on the gauge moved like it had manners. Reliability wasn't a slogan. It was that car starting on the third morning after a hard frost. In motels off the interstate, sales reps opened briefcases and talked to dealers about parts networks, service intervals, the quiet revolution of not getting stranded. Detroit listened with crossed arms, then started measuring. You could feel the whole industry shift a shoulder, like a man adjusting a jacket that suddenly fit wrong. Smaller engines weren't a confession. They were a new language. Fuel economy stopped being an apology and became a design brief. We started seeing other experiments sprout. A neighbor mounted a homemade windmill on a barn roof, sheet metal blades that creaked in a steady breeze. Local papers ran stories about a lab downstate testing solar cells under milk glass skies. Nuclear power drifted back into supper table conversations, this time as a maybe instead of a monster. Not consensus, never that, but curiosity. The 70s energy crisis had turned us into tinkerers. At home, the math changed the light bulbs. Those new yellow appliance stickers began appearing like report cards on refrigerators and washers. You could stand in an aisle and compare kilowatt hours the way you'd compare price per pound. I watched a couple argue gently over a freezer's energy rating, then laugh and choose the thriftier one. Insulation crews knocked on doors, unspooling pink batting into attics, stapling up the feeling of a house that leaked less. The air itself seemed to learn restraint. I learned to read my own driveway. I parked downhill when I could, so the engine did less work getting me home. I kept a small notebook, miles, gallons, the weather. Over time, a personality emerged. My car preferred cool mornings, new plugs, and a gentle foot. When you treated it that way, it treated you back. There was something proud in that bargain. Even the swagger shifted. Bumper stickers that once bragged about cubic inches gave way to little winks about efficiency. You'd see my other car is a carpool and know they were half joking, half recruiting. Pride moved from loud to low key. A neighbor traded his big block for a hatchback and didn't apologize. He popped the hood and showed me how easy it was to reach the oil filter. "Look," he said, "I can do this in my Sunday shirt." Detroit, to its credit, learned faster than folks expected. Platforms shrank. Weight fell. Engineers found power in timing and breathing instead of brute force. Some of it worked beautifully, some of it clattered, but you could feel the gears turning, literally and figuratively. We were building cars for the lives we actually lived, not the lives we imagined on open highways with endless gas. The lesson stretched beyond engines. Offices turned off lights at noon on sunny days, letting windows do what they were built to do. Schools set thermostats lower and told kids to bring sweaters. Factories recovered waste heat and piped it into break rooms. Coffee steaming on thrift. The same resourcefulness that pushed a stalled Chevy over a hill pushed companies to rethink waste as something with a price tag. And here's the thing I still carry. Thrift didn't feel small anymore. It felt capable. It felt like skill. We took pleasure in coaxing more from less, in seeing the gauge drop slower, the bill shrink, the household heat like a held hand. Efficiency became a kind of grace, quiet, repeatable, shared. We weren't just saving fuel, we were learning to steer differently. Thursday mornings, 4 a.m., became my strange little chapel. The windshield wore a thin lace of frost, and the radio gave that soft hiss between stations like the country itself was clearing its throat. I'd sip from a dented thermos, hold the cup in both hands, and watch the station across the way glow awake, one fluorescent tube at a time, the world coming on in strips. I had a ritual: chalk a note on the dash, miles, last fill, a guess at today's ration, crack the window 2 fingers width to hear the line breathe. Somewhere down the block, a diesel would cough. Someone up ahead would knock on a trunk and call, "We moving?" And we'd move. 3 car lengths, then stillness again. That rhythm steadied me. Push, coast, wait. It felt like prayer without words. A co-worker slipped into my life because of those mornings. She lived out near the old brick plant opposite direction from me. But our shifts matched. We tried a carpool, both a little proud and a little wary. The first week, we argued about the best route. She liked the boulevard, I liked the back streets. The second week, we laughed about arguing and saved a tank between us. By the third, we were swapping recipes and calling out potholes like a well-practiced duo. Gas money passed between us like a handshake. We made the commute smaller together. I still see that mother from 2 blocks over, the one who always had a map folded like origami in her hand. She'd circle rumors in pencil. "Pete's opens at 6. Cash only," she'd say, like she was briefing a search party. Her kids sat in pajamas in the back seat with toast wrapped in napkins. When she finally reached the nozzle, she measured out $10 like she was pouring medicine. Enough to make it, not enough to waste. I carried her map in my head for months. The station owner, Bill, took years off his life that winter. He started sleeping on a cot behind the cigarette rack, a rough blanket and a clock that never stopped glowing. He rationed by numbers and by faces. 10 gallons, 12 if he knew you had a nurse's shift, 15 if you hauled drywall for a crew and had 4 guys waiting on you. He turned friends away and cried once in the supply closet. I know because I knocked to ask about radiator hoses and heard him catch his breath. He opened the door with that red ring in his eye and said, "Give me 15 minutes." I did. Truckers turned into lifelines with mileage logs. One told me he was living on the edge of his logbook and his patience, counting layover hours in a diner that smelled like coffee and diesel. He got one delivery through to a small grocery 2 towns over after 3 stops, 2 reroutes, and a prayer over the gauge. The town treated his trailer like Christmas. Milk, bread, and 4 crates of oranges. Kids ate slices right there in the parking lot. Juice on their chins, mothers grinning like something had gone right for once. He said it made the layovers worth it. And then there was that teenager on Elm, skinny as a rake, baseball bat across his lap in the front seat, pretending not to be scared. His parents had parked the car nose in to the curb at dusk, a good spot for the morning line. He drew the short straw to guard it overnight. Every shadow was a rumor. He nodded at me when I walked the dog, like we both knew this wasn't the kind of story you brag about, but the kind you remember. At dawn, he handed the keys to his mother like a medal. Not every story had grace. A neighbor woke up to a puddle under his sedan, the scent of gasoline heavy as a headache. Someone had fed a hose into his tank and taken what they needed. He stood there in his bathrobe with a gas cap dangling, and I wanted to say something that would fix it. I couldn't. I helped him roll the car back into the driveway, and we both stared at the dark spot on the street like it could answer us. But then there was the morning a Chevy stalled halfway up Maple. 4 of us leaned in, hands on cold metal, and pushed until our lungs burned. A 5th man came running in slippers, and a woman in a coat 2 sizes too big wedged a wedge of wood under the tire between pushes. When we crested, the driver put his head on the steering wheel and cried. Nobody said, "You're welcome." We just smiled and let gravity give us back our breath. Between all that, patience became its own currency. People traded it like spare change. A nurse cut in line at the station, and we let her, not because she asked, but because we recognized the shoes. A man at pump 3 overfilled and spilled, and nobody snapped. 3 paper towels appeared like magic. In the glove box, I kept a notebook that turned into a little ledger of kindness, dates in gallons, but also asterisks for the neighbor who shared a siphon hose, the clerk who set aside a quart of oil for me, the trooper who waved us through because a shift whistle was about to blow. We learned each other's stories in inches. The city shrank to the length of a queue, the country to the murmur of carburetors at dawn. By the time the nozzle clicked and the receipt tore, you knew whose mother was sick, whose kid needed cleats, whose radiator ran hot. Waiting taught us the shape of other people's lives, and that felt like fuel too. Then came the month when the numbers stopped being background noise and started feeling like a bruise. Groceries jumped a few nickels here, a quarter there, and the total at the register learned how to surprise you. We called it inflation, and pretty soon stagflation moved from newspaper columns to the kitchen table. My paycheck didn't stretch, it thinned. You could see through it in places. At work, hours shortened before anyone said the word layoff out loud. The foreman started rotating Fridays off. "Temporary," he said, like a man putting a tarp over something he didn't want us to see. Coffee breaks got longer because decisions got slower. I watched a buddy pack a second shift into his life. Stocking at a pharmacy after dinner, eyes rimmed red, pride intact. Brown bag lunches returned, heavy with leftovers, and the soda machine stood there like an unnecessary luxury. We felt the one-and-a-half recession in our shoes, not our headlines. TV news learned split screen. On one side, a line at a pump. On the other, a graph climbing like ivy. Anchors said Consumer Price Index, while comedians tried gas jokes that tasted a little stale even as they landed. You could laugh, then feel disloyal for laughing. That was the mood, a mix of grit and apology. We trimmed the commute the way we'd been trimming everything else. Carpool lanes sprouted diamonds and purpose, and I started recognizing the same faces in the same cars at 7:10 a.m. 3 heads in a sedan meant they'd sleep better that night. Bikes sold out at the hardware store. A neighbor in a suit started riding in with his pant leg clipped, tie tucked into his shirt. He waved at me one morning like the road itself had become a small shared joke. Distance wasn't abstract anymore. It had a price per mile. The strange thing is how practicality turned into a kind of environmental awareness without anyone announcing it. Earth Day had been a banner. Now it was a quiet calculus. Turn off the light wasn't a slogan. It was a rule that made the bill less frightening. We learned where drafts crept, which rooms kept heat, how to let the oven's warmth linger after dinner. A different respect took root for resources, for time, for each other's schedules. Conservation stopped sounding like scolding and started sounding like competence. I remember Christmas creeping up on us that year. The big outdoor light stayed in the box. We strung a single line around the front window and called it good. It felt small and right at the same time, like we were choosing glow over glare. The kids pressed their noses to the glass anyway. The house looked gentle from the street. My friend Maria, accounts payable, quick with a joke, kept the office heartbeat steady. She started a ledger on the break room wall. Carpools, bulk bought coffee, who needed a hand with daycare pickups when hours shifted. She wrote, "We measure twice, we drive once," and people signed underneath like it was a pledge. That's how the recession looked up close, not graphs, but tiny agreements. Of course, it wasn't tidy. A plant 2 towns over shuttered for a month, and families there recalculated everything. Yard sales appeared in November cold, card tables lined with a season's worth of second chances. You'd see a trumpet, a set of mixing bowls, a wedding gift still in the box. I bought a space heater for $5 and a story about a son heading to look for work 3 states away. We all carried a piece of that, and yet somehow we built new habits that outlived the panic. Shorter errands, calmer feet on the pedals, meetings on the phone instead of miles on the odometer. My boss said, "No need to come in for that," and it felt like a small mercy as much as a policy. Offices learned to dim at lunch. Warehouses learned to schedule deliveries in bundles. The 1973 American history you read later will talk about macroeconomics, but I think the real lesson lived in those everyday pivots. By spring, the lines thinned, not vanished, thinned. But the systems we'd woven held. Carpool boards stayed pinned up. Thermostats didn't creep back as far as before. We'd learned the language of less, and we spoke it with less fear. The shock had done its worst. The muscle we built, patience, planning, restraint, did its best. In the aftermath, the government did something rare. It tried to bottle time. They carved out salt caverns along the Gulf Coast and began filling them with crude, a strategic petroleum reserve, a national buffer for the next shock. I remember reading about oil sleeping underground like money in a mattress and thinking, good, let it rest where no rumor can steal it at midnight. At the same time, those new initials, CAFE, quietly rewired Detroit. Corporate average fuel economy wasn't a slogan, it was law with teeth. The yardstick changed and cars followed. Sheet metal thinned, aerodynamics mattered, engines learned discipline. You could trace the curve on a napkin, miles per gallon up, octane swagger down. We missed some of the noise, sure, but we got range, and we kept getting home. Codes crept into our walls too. Builders started packing houses tighter. Windows learned to hold their breath. Furnaces stopped behaving like bonfires. Those yellow appliance stickers became a common language, watts and dollars, honest and comparable. It didn't feel heroic. It felt useful. The quiet backbone of conservation slipped under everything, attics, storefronts, school gyms. Then the echoes kept coming. 79 rolled through with a second punch, another oil crisis and fresh lines, a déjà vu nobody wanted. Later, a war in the Gulf sent us back to maps and evening news briefings. Hurricanes shutting platforms, and you could feel the price jump like a startled cat. A pipeline hiccup here, a refinery fire there, every time the old muscle memory twitched. We'd top off, we'd share rides, we'd scan the station lights at dusk. I think about today and how the story rhymes. EV chargers instead of nozzles, apps instead of radio rumors, remote work taking miles off the board. A storm knocks out a grid, a headline spikes the pump, and you can still hear the same debate. Independence? Resilience? Who gets to decide what's necessary? The dashboard changed. The questions didn't. There's a stretch of highway near town where an abandoned station still sits. Faded pump numbers, a roofline that sagged into memory. I pass it sometimes and hear that old dawn chorus in my head. The click of turned signals, the cough of a cold engine, the unspoken promise to make it stretch. Policy built scaffolding after 73, reserves, standards, codes. But what held was us, the habits we learned when comfort blinked, plan, share, slow down. The road still hums with that lesson if you listen long enough. The headlines faded, the lines disappeared, but the lesson never left us. The 1973 oil crisis wasn't just about gas. It was about control, connection, and how fragile comfort can be. We learned that convenience has a cost, that power can stall, and that sometimes the hum of a waiting engine says more about a country than any speech ever could. Today, as we plug in electric cars and scroll through another news cycle about fuel and fear, the echoes of '73 still whisper through the highway wind. Don't take the drive for granted, because history has a way of circling the block, and one day it might pull up behind you again.